I'm John Lyles, New Mexico caver and member of the Fort Stanton Cave Study Project. I'm going to talk about solving the enigma of Engel Hill inside Fort Stanton Cave in New Mexico. This is a dig that has a long history, and we came up with some very interesting workarounds, let's say, this year due to some exploration in 2019 that were talked about in U.S. Exploration Talk and also here. So let's talk about it. The entrance is this sinkhole you see in the middle of the picture. It's a single entrance to a 40-plus mile cave now. And Engel Hill is not that far in the cave. It's a couple of miles approximately from the entrance. But the way we got there to the dig, well, let me just talk about it in the talk here. This map shows the location of the cave in south central New Mexico. It's the red dot located between Roswell and Socorro along Highway 380. It's near the town of Lincoln. It's also near Capitan, New Mexico. And Lincoln, known for the Lincoln County War of the 1880s. You've probably heard of that. It's managed by the Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Department of Interior, out of the Roswell field office, and a caver by the name of Newt Peterson is the local manager of this cave project, and also it's a national conservation area as designated by Congress back in I think around 2005 or so was when that was going through. So the cave is protected from surface intrusions and things, but the cave is outgrowing the conservation area now. Here's a map of Fort Stanton Cave prior to 2001, and Engel Hill is at the far south end of the known cave at that time. It's approximately a 2-hour travel time, a vigorous trip through a bit of crawling, quite a bit of crawling through a place called Hell Hole and another long crawl, Crystal Crawl, and then quite a bit of walking as well to get to Engel Hill, and it's a little less than 2 miles, I believe, as the crow flies from the entrance. The entrance is located in the left, and you can kind of see the cluster of passages coming together around the entrance sinkhole. Let me talk about the history of the Engel Hill dig. In 1962, there was an airy but dead-end walking passage called the Gypsum Passage that began in the far south of the, quote, new section of Fort Stanton Cave, the new section being discovered in the 50s. And Lee Skinner started digging after he sat in this cool corner of the passage and felt the cool air coming out of the soil there. And he began this dig that ended up going all the way to 1969. In the mid-60s, Lee had to go somewhere else for work or school, and Robbie Babb took on the running the dig, and he enlarged a long passage called Babb's Burrow, which is a low crawl, and it had some small pockets that you could sit up in, but mostly it was a crawl the whole way until you got to the other end. In 1969, in between June and August, Lee Skinner had returned, and he worked 10 straight weekends, 2 days in each time, and they broke through into the Lincoln Caverns Passage, which is a large trunk, very decorated in the cave. Dennis Engel was one of the diggers that got through, and the first person through on the other side of the Babb's Burrow. So anyway, you'll see his name now, Dennis Engel. He's no longer caving in the area. I think he's moved up to the north somewhere like Wisconsin, Madison, I believe. But more than a half mile of decorated large passage is in Lincoln Caverns, and it reaches this massive breakdown collapse at the south end, and the air continues but is lost in the breakdown, and so it was named Engel Hill. And digging in the 1970s continued upward, using screwed together steel pipe sections to probe overhead breakdown up in a joint. And I'll show pictures of that in a little bit. And they did use some chemical persuasion, I understand. But the dire conditions just dampened the enthusiasm on that dig. This is what Babs Burrow looks like in a more modern picture around 2007. Jennifer Foote there pushing her pack through. This is one of the actual, not the tightest part, but a pretty decent middle section of the Babs Burrow crawl. And they enlarged all this through digging. I think it's several hundred feet long. This is a very old picture, one of the few I have of a historic photo of Lincoln Caverns, and I have no idea who the person is. He's not looking at the most beautiful formations, but it's an old slide that I found through the project. Here you've got a more modern shot where we have a hand line to get down this slope, and that's in Lincoln Caverns. And then this is one of the more decorated areas taken with the snap instant camera, as you can see the dust balls on it. And then this is Engel Hill. So this large trunk of cave just sort of plummets into this hill of breakdown, and the hill goes up, and there's a tortuous route to get up to the top of the hill, and that's where the dig was. Here you go. You can see Lincoln Caverns coming in from the right, and it hits this breakdown on the lower left there, Engel Hill. It does continue to the Tiger Tail Room and some small passage, and then the Tiger Tail Room has got a lot of mud in the floor, but so far we haven't found any air back in there. All the air seems to be going into the breakdown of Engel Hill. Here's looking up through the vertical dig. We took this photo actually last year, and I brought a camera, and we did a reconnaissance of the old original dig. I had seen it maybe 15 years ago and lost, you know how caver memories are. You kind of think, oh, it's pretty good. After a while, it starts sounding better and better. And I was like, oh, we'll be able to get through that with some modern technology. But we went and looked at it, and that's Raymond Arman there looking up, I think. Or that could be me. No, I think that's Raymond. This is straight up where he was looking there, and you're looking up this joint, and that joint is maybe a foot wide at the top, and there's loose rocks up there that are just sort of wedged in that if you were to shake them with a pole, they're liable to come plummeting down and bring down quite a bit more. And beyond those rocks, it pinches tight. I took a camera on a stick up there and proved that this dig does not have a chance of opening up unless we had some major explosives to open it up, but then it would be a real mess there. And it wasn't until Snowy River was discovered in 2001, and it started being pushed to the south in 2003, that the true nature of Fort Stanton Cave was being realized. And this is a map of mid-2013 showing that Fort Stanton Cave had grown from a 7.5 mile to a 26-mile cave. And Midnight Junction was found in 2012 at midnight on one evening, and it's 10 miles from the entrance. And that's the junction down at the bottom of the map where you see a bunch of passage taken off 3 different directions. Snowy River being one of those passages. It's still going, by the way. If you look where Lincoln's Caverns is, you can see it's way up in the first third up there on the left passage that's coming down. Not the entrance, but the one below the entrance. It's the end of that. So you can see now how much the old limit of the cave, which was Engel Hill, has been passed by Snowy River. And what we needed was a way to connect back to that passage. We've been looking mainly at the Snowy River level, which is a low level in the cave, and we kept going further south and further south. And as you can see, that's not the right direction. We need to be going northeast. So by 2014, Fort Stanton Cave was 31 miles long, and the camp was starting to be established at Midnight Junction in the south. Several trips, I don't remember if it's 2 or 3 trips, were out there to camp. Then nature decided to stop our exploration south by flooding the passage, and it remained flooded for 4 years. So Snowy River was flooded. A total sump occurred at Mud Lizard, which is in the beginning upper third of Snowy River, and that thwarted trips to the south. That sump can fill up to 20 feet deep, way above the passage, so you would be trapped if you were on the other side of that. And It led us to focus on the historic parts of the cave again, including resurveying the entire old survey of the cave, and we checked the Engel Hill dig. It looked good, but digging would be challenging. And what I mean by it looked good, the air felt good, and we knew there had to be a way. But the old dig was not looking promising, but it wasn't until 2019 that I really got a feel of that when I took the videos. So I started a project to improve the stability of the far end of Bab's Burrow, because that crawl had some unstable rock in the ceiling at the end of it where you pop out into the beginning of Lincoln Caverns. And the next passage shows the results of that. That was around 2015. You can see the unstable rocks above me there. And as you came out of there, you didn't want to stand up and bump your head. There was breccia holding that together, and it wasn't even consolidated with calcite. It was literally clay and cobbles and dirt held together by the friction of the cobbles and the boulders. And so the lower two photos you can see before and after. We had this interesting project where Brian Kendrick, myself, and Jennifer Foote were on the inside, and we had a rescue team on the outside, and we had a communication system that didn't work so that we could call them. So we just told them, if you don't see us by 6 p.m., come in and see the status, and if you find it's blocked in rocks, that's because we're digging it out. And what we did was we brought down that mountain of rock up there, and we were able to clear it out all in a few hours. It was hard work, and get back out of there. So now it's a bit safer, and you come out. You still don't want to touch the ceiling, but there's a lot more space. Another team was led by David and James Hunter of New Mexico, and they proposed and were permitted to dig at Engel Hill starting in 2015, and they chose a lower route near the bottom of Engel Hill into the breakdown. It would be a longer route because you're going through the wider part of the breakdown at the bottom, but it still had air, and it followed a solid wall to improve the safety of the digging. It didn't go right under breakdown. It had a wall and some pretty solid rock above it. And so they were basically chipping away at the rock and digging. And after several trips, though, their enthusiasm was diminishing as other caving projects were happening in the States, and also work for some of them had to travel out of the state and leave the country for work. So the dig sort of slowed down, and you can see it on your left there on the top photo. That's the beginning of the dig where they went down against the wall. And typical digging equipment on the right. Some of that's the equipment I had in the cave from an earlier dig outside of Lincoln Caverns, and it was brought back here to reuse in this portion of the cave. So I had a little bit of ownership in this dig, in that I had hauled all this equipment, a good bit of the equipment out there. And then in the lower two, I think there's a caver in the dig that they were working on. You can see they're under the breakdown, but going along, and they kind of hit a floor down there, so they were moving along on that, but it was very slow going. And in 2018, though, there was a 2-month window where the flood had stopped by summer. The cave was drying out, and we were able to get in September and October. And we pushed an upper level climb above the middle section of Snowy River into a passage that we called Gold Rush. And that's a major breakout heading north towards the far side of Engel Hill, but a few miles away. And you can see it here. You can also see the sump area and Snowy River of Mud Lizard, we call it. And you can see Engel Hill. So that green passage going due north, Gold Rush, was looking promising. And the changing hydrological conditions were increasing the annual flood events. As we went through 4 years, and then after 2018 we had another flood, and it lasted until last summer. So camping in the far south of Midnight Junction way down Snowy River has been blocked since 2014, so we don't even know what the status of that camp is right now. The new Gold Rush passage looked like it could be a dry passage, being higher up in the cave, and it could possibly get around that sump as an emergency route to get out. We had no idea what the passage was going to be like, but the Engel Hill side was hard enough. If you had a big pack, you might not get through Bab's Burrow with it. But it came a top priority with the BLM and the Fort Stanton Cave Study Project to push this dig as well as Gold Rush and try to make a way. So here's some examples of some of the geophysical techniques we use. This is ground resistivity done by John McLean of Colorado. And the circled area is that blank area between Gold Rush in 2018 and Engel Hill. And you can see some red spots, which were big voids that the underground resistivity survey did show. And some of those resistivity surveys have been very effective. You can see them on Snowy River where they pinpointed it pretty well. So we've gained a lot of confidence in this technique using resistivity and 8 or 12 probes in the ground in a long array and doing the mathematics to show what the two-dimensional slice resistivity might look like and where there might be voids. So with that, there was promise. And then in 2019, I returned in May with Raymond Arman and John Dunham, both from the Northeast and members of this digging section. And they were working on Fort Stanton Cave as members. They've been making annual pilgrimages out to try to get on some of the trips, and they did. And so we went to the old top dig there at Engel Hill, and we really found it unworkable. We used a video probe on a pole 12 feet long and folded it up and took it in there and then went up there and videoed it and proved that it was not the going way to go. As a matter of fact, we looked all along that upper joint and there was nowhere that opened up. It all got tighter and tighter, and it was solid rock on both sides. And so I'm not going to show the videos because they take too much bandwidth, but you can just see me probing up there with this little camera. But as we were finishing the video work, I climbed down a slope and we decided to do some survey in that area because it hadn't been surveyed very well. Those old digs were not really tied into any modern survey. So we started surveying. I found a low crawl under a boulder with air midway along the face of Engel Hill. It was working against a wall again. I think it may be the same wall that the Hunter dig was working in the lower level, and it's higher up, so that's a good thing. There was good air, so we tried to get in there. Raymond was able to squeeze through without any modification, and he got into an area that he was gone for at least 10 minutes as we were calling him and we could hear him. And he said, yeah, there's a nice void in here and there's air. So we opened that up a little bit, moved some rocks around, and started the Midway Dig, which is, we only had a few hours left that day to dig. And so I'll show some pictures. Here's someone going through Bab's Burrow for size there. Here's the hole under the rock where we're starting to enlarge the crawlway to get into it. And there's a nice head wall above me there that you can see is solid that we were working under. So that led some confidence in this dig. And then this is the crawlway in. We actually enlarged that slot to the left of that big rock so that you could put your body in there and get through a little easier than just laying over that rock, because it's a little bit tight on your butt and your ribs and things if you just go over that rock. But if you get in the slot, you can get around it. And we hammered on that and reduced some of it, so now it's even better. And this is John Dunham's rough sketch showing the relationship of the three digs when you're facing in Engel Hill breakdown. So the Hunter dig is down to the right bottom. You can see the Midway dig up along that wall, and then the top dig, the old dig at the very top where it goes into a crack. And then the stuff on your left, there's an unsurveyed room that turns out to be full of breccia. A little bit of air in it, but it just didn't feel as good as this Midway dig, so we didn't spend much time in it. And the route up is along the KS survey, so you go up along the wall facing this, and you crawl up, and you go through quite a few restrictions and tight spots, but you get to this area. This is actually the survey that we did that day of the dig, and the passage above it leading up to the top dig. You can see in the lower half of this the profile leading up, and then you see the new dig to the right, to the left going along, and that's the Midway dig. So that's all new survey there from about 24 on. Here we are at the dig area where we'd gone through Raymond's passage, and it's still big enough to stand up in parts, at least sit up, and there's plenty of room to store rocks at this time. So we were looking, and we had to move some rocks to make it a little more accessible. There's a caver behind that rock, but it's uncomfortable back there. So we chipped on that rock and tried to get it out. We got it reduced in size, at least by breaking it with a hammer and some chisels and things. And so there's a little access around it. And I returned after that weekend. I returned in August last year with 3 New Mexico cavers: Brian Kendrick, Minoru Yoshida, and Todd Roberts. Those are Todd and Minoru are from Albuquerque area. And we brought a lot more good tools into the dig, and we had more time because we went right to the dig instead of messing around in Engel Hill. And by the end of the day, we had advanced a full body length into that wall beyond that rock. The ceiling is not great in that area. On the left side, there's a lot of unconsolidated breccia again. I even got bopped on the head by a little rock as I was taking video in there. And then there's a little hole in the back with air blowing out. It felt really good. Here's Minoru and Todd. We're trying to get that same rock out, but this time we're getting smart. We brought webbing, and we were all pulling on it and pushing on it, and we managed to get it webbed and pulled up, and it's pulled up out of his way, so he's in there now. And there's Minoru beating it to a pulp. We did manage to reduce it to rubble, as we did quite a few other rocks in that area. So then we planted them in the little antechamber before this. Here you can see another rock coming out, and that one's below his feet in the dig in the wall. And once we removed that, he was able to get into that hole. So that one was pulled out and brought out and reduced to rubble as well. So there you go. Caver's now all the way into the wall, feet showing, and there's air in that thing, and we're underneath that ceiling. Unfortunately, you can see the ceiling on the right, and you can see the breccia on the left. So we have to make a decision. Do we reduce some of this breccia and knock it out of there? Or will it be more above us that'll keep coming down? Or do we leave it and try to get through this area? The area we want to go is to the right of this. It's this area. And that's a little hole where the air was blowing. And we need to move those rocks out without taking down the left ceiling. Here's backing up, so for scale you can see my glove. It's not a big hole. It's probably 6 inches tall, 6 inches wide. And I went in a couple of feet with the camera, just holding a camera, and it's just blocked up, but it's very easy to excavate in there. But we need to move a lot of rocks around it to make it big enough to get people back in there. So then October came and Gold Rush was explored. We had a chance to go in. Garrett Jorgensen led 3 trips to Gold Rush, and this is what you see is the direction it went. It went right to Lincoln Caverns in Engel Hill, and that's exactly what we hoped. There were 3 expedition trips, each one 2 days long: October 4th, October 13th, and October 18th. And all 3 of us that had worked on that dig, Raymond, John, and I, had all gotten on one of these trips. So you can see that in the middle photo, it's me, John Dunham, Brian Kendrick, and Brian, and Garrett Jorgensen, who's the leader of the trips. And in the right photo, you see Raymond on the right, and there's Garrett again. And I'm giving a talk, or it may be over by the time you see this. It's at the U.S. Exploration Session online. It's called Exploration Fort Stanton Cave, New Mexico, 5.46 miles in 2019. That pretty much explains what happened, so I'm going to not spend a lot of time and belabor that. Also, Adam Weaver wrote an article in the NSS News in May on the Capitan Caverns discovery, and that's a nice long spread with photos and a lot more description than I can give in a short talk. So I'll leave it with that, but the Gold Rush discovery was wonderful because as it opened up Capitan Caverns, which was even bigger, it was headed in the right direction. And you can see there where we're headed, and there were multiple passages in parallel at the end. There was a big loop, and so quite a bit of work was done in that area. And mud lizard and the sump is over on Snowy River to the east of us there. So you can see if this connected, we might have a dry route from the entrance all the way to the middle of Snowy River. And from there on down Snowy River, everything's pretty much walking and big. There's not a lot of crawls that can trap you, at least. So you would have a good rescue route to get out of the cave that way if something happened. So the far side of Engel Hill was found. This is it. And we're looking at passage headed right for it. It's starting to look like Engel Hill. The dimensions are right, and there's air. And we found this about 2 in the morning on a Saturday night, I think, on the second trip. We were on this point here. We got all the way up into the breakdown. It reminded us of the far side. And one area below this, Garrett was able to get in quite a ways, and there was good air coming out of these rocks. And he's facing our dig on the other side. And we weren't able to move rocks by hand. We didn't have enough tools. The rocks were cemented, and the slot between them was too small for people. So you would need tools on this side to dig it open. And we haven't figured out the logistics of getting tools out there. This is like an 8.5-mile trip from the entrance going from Snowy River. There it is in plan view, and you can see the new survey on the left in green. The little survey on the right at the end of Engel Hill was my dig from last year, the 2 trips. And you can see we're headed right for it. And in the profile, we're at the right level even. It looks like the middle level is the right one, and that's going almost to the level of the dig at Midway. So here's the little gap shown that you saw earlier on the real map, and you see the 2 question marks showing the gap there. It's about 300 to 400 feet. So it's not going to be an easy dig coming from the Engel Hill side. It may take years, but at least we now have an incentive. And you might ask, why would we have an incentive to dig where we've already been? Well, for one reason, scientists would like to get to the other side. If you look at the other talk on U.S. exploration, you'll see amazing, amazing decorations out there and pool fingers and all kinds of neat stuff. Also, there's more leads out there that we hadn't got to. But the main impetus would be a rescue route. And it wouldn't be a trade route to get through there because the Engel Hill Passage and Babb's Burrow are tight. And then the far side of Capitan Caverns is very decorated with soda straws and all kinds of formations. So it would probably never be a trade route, but it could be a good rescue route if it could be opened up. And so we'll keep working at it. So 2019 was a really good year for the Engel Hill digs, especially Midway, even without a breakthrough. We have had cavers in the Fort Stanton Cave Study Project that have been working for 50 years on that area, including Lincoln Caverns and the Upper Dig, and they finally got to see what was beyond the breakdown by watching our slides and hearing our discussions and seeing our trip reports. So they're pleased and even more excited to see us figure out how to get through this dig. And we found a great extension of Lincoln Caverns beyond Engel Hill off of Gold Rush. After caving for 8.5 miles, the air was still there. There's directional aragonite in Capitan Caverns. And Capitan Gap is the remaining unopened pit distance through the breakdown. It's 300 or 400 feet, as I said, and it won't be easy. But there's a lot of impetus to do it. And people that really aren't ready to go out and do Snowy River could work on this. So this is a good other project. If Snowy River's flooded, we can work on this because it's in the dry part of the cave. It's going to be continued in the future, as I said, working from the Lincoln Caverns side and possibly the lower dig and the Midway dig. Radio location is one idea we have where we could put a station on both sides of the Engel Hill and get real accurate result there to make sure that we're right on those locations. But we feel pretty good because all this survey, except for the Snowy River beginning part, which was not with Disto X's, but a lot of the Gold Rush is all Disto X, and Lincoln Caverns is all getting resurveyed now. So with that, I want to acknowledge the photographers and the BLM and the Fort Stanton Cave Study Project. And I want to give a plug to the FSCSP for their book 12 Miles from Daylight, which you've seen at previous conventions. We still have copies of the original edition of that for sale, and it describes the Lincoln Caverns and all that, but it doesn't describe the gold rush. That's since the book was published. So I think that's enough. So thank you very much.